When Jack Nicklaus was at the top of his game, meaning he was a golfer, for those who don't know, meaning he was the world champion at the time, this guy is the greatest golfer in the world. He would, in the off-season, go back to the coach who taught him the game of golf, so when he was a youngster, and tell his coach to treat him as a beginner and teach him the game of golf as if it were the first time. All right, let that sink in. I love this story. It's true. It's not a made-up story. It's one of those stories I really like because it highlights the importance of establishing the humility of the man, but his awareness, the importance of establishing a solid foundation, getting back to the basics, and making sure that first things are first. In this case, with the sport, the basic skill set that was always under review and was being perfected. Doesn't matter who you are, how good you are, any of the top athletes know that if they're not reviewing things and what we would call an examination of professional conscience, or technique, that they can get sloppy. And then it builds, muscle memory in a bad way. Now, if you think this is kind of silly or a waste of time, all I could say to you is I wouldn't argue with the world's greatest golfer. This inspiring story about a great sportsman speaks to and repeats the foundational lesson that we encountered in last week's reading and is repeated in a different way in today's readings, and that is the Aqēḍah. Now, you might remember, or you might think, well, how so? Now, how does this somehow relate to the binding of Isaac? I mean, that's a little stretched, But we have to dive into the readings, and hopefully I can show the link between all of this. Remember, the Aqēḍah is not a cruel God asking for child sacrifice. In fact, God forbade child sacrifice under the penalty of death. Well, of course, God is the giver of all life, but that is not the point in the Aqēḍah. Rather, it is a God who loves Abraham and Isaac. Remember, Isaac, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So Isaac would be one of the great patriarchs. So he loves Abraham and Isaac and is asking Abraham to show outwardly what it takes for true love to exist in this world. What it takes for true love, not for love, but for true love to exist in this world. Now, God must be first, and not just first in line, not just above others, or not just better, but adored in everything. It's the love of latria, or it is latria, not just a human love. Like the three forms, the Greeks identify three kinds of love: eros, philia, and agape. These are three different kinds of love. But this is specifically the love of latria, which is the adoration due only to one. Only to one. Even the saints do not get latria, they get doulia. They get respect. It's kind of a special honor. And Our Lady gets hyperdoulia. It's kind of like, not exaggerated, but it's a respect or an honor that is sort of reserved for only one, and that is her. Because she's the mother of God, she's full of grace. She's the queen of heaven and earth. So this is latria is reserved only to one. Now we can know this intellectually, but we betray ourselves quite frequently as a people. So God must be loved first and adored with everything that makes up who we are, constitutes our human person. Our whole mind, our whole heart, our whole soul, our whole body. And then and only then can people, family, spouses, children, jobs, you name it, be loved truly and properly. This is an absolutely foundational lesson in life. It goes back to the Garden of Eden. The lesson of the Aqēḍah actually makes right in a kind of prototype or pointing to the future what went wrong in Eden with Adam choosing himself and his wife over God. So this is when I say foundational problem, this is like back to the origin. It actually brings about original sin when it's messed up. The human heart, since original sin, has become an idol-making factory. It's an idol-making factory. We are continuously latching onto a myriad of persons and things and putting them in the place of God. Just read the Old Testament. I'm going through it again. The people saw literally one day in the book of Numbers, they see the ground open up to this family that's revolting against Moses, Dathan and the Kohathites. They're rebelling against Moses. Moses tells everyone, get out of their vicinity. Literally, the ground opens up and closes. Like you think that would make these people think. The next day, they were rebelling against Moses again. Like, that's how fickle we are. That's how stubborn or sometimes slow to learn. We're not impossible, but sometimes we seem like we are pretty close to it. It's a good thing God is patient and loving and kind, but he doesn't tolerate nonsense because we have to learn. Otherwise, we can never be in heaven. We have to learn somewhere before we die. The stakes are literally eternal. So instead of sacrificing God, instead of sacrificing ourselves to God, we sacrifice God to our pleasures, to people, to sports, to work, and so on. That's what happens in the practical realities of everyday life. God gets sacrificed and replaced all the time, if you think about it. For example, on the Lord's Day and in our personal lives, he gets sacrificed for the very goods that he has allowed us or given us on loan. It's all on loan. My life is on loan. Everything we have is on loan. All the things that we enjoy, whether it's our computers, our sports games, being with each other, it's all on loan. And one day it's going to be either freely offered to God or ripped out of our hands. When I say ripped out of our hands, if we refuse to let it go, death will rip it out of our hands, and there will be no virtue involved. But if we hand it back to God, there is the trust that he will give it back to us in a better format, in a better way. So God all too often gets sacrificed to all these things in this world. The Aqēḍah is the return to the basics for us. It is like asking God to teach us the ABCs of happiness and holiness, of what true love is. And all of us need to learn this. I don't care who it is. Nobody has love perfectly except the Blessed Mother when she was here on earth. Maybe St. Joseph because he was wedded to her, and of course Jesus was right in his midst. But all of us have to learn this. Let's look at the divorce rate. Come on, how many friendships there are, the viciousness of the tongue in politics and so on. We think we know how to love. Yeah, right. We have to learn constantly how to love properly, and then we have to renew it. Because I know the definition, I know the formulas, but it doesn't mean I always live it out. I have to revisit it all the time because my weak, fallible, wayward human nature constantly is, all over the place, right? We get tired, grumpy, grouchy, all that kind of stuff. In today's readings, God gives us the lesson of the Aqēḍah in a different kind of way. It is not the sacrifice of Isaac, but the obedience to the commandments. See, this is really important. It's foundational. I would submit that the Aqēḍah is built into the commandments. How, you might say? Well, think of it. Look at it the way they are structured. God is first. God must be first. Hear, O Israel, the Lord is one. I'm just phrasing it in a different way, that it's how it's been phrased differently. But it's essentially the same thing. Hear, O Israel, the Lord is one. And you must love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, and soul. So love God, adore God, and then honor, reverence his holy name, keep the Sabbath holy. And then, and only then, can we understand what falls afterwards. And can we do it right? Honor your father and mother, don't murder, and so on and so on. So unless this is, if this order is not maintained, we have a moral mess. We have turgid waters in this world, like it's not operating the way it should. Things are off kilter because we do this, right? This is what we do so often rather than keep this. Honor God, reverence his name. Reverence his name is just not a matter of, not using bad language. It revolves a whole lot more than that, but I don't have time to get into it. But honor the Sabbath. Like if every day of our week, if Sunday is like every day of our week, and I'm not, I can't go into everything. I can't make all the qualifiers because I'd be here for 2 or 3 hours. But if Sunday is like every day of the week, what distinguishes us from everybody else in the world? I'm not talking about the people who have to work and they have no choice. That's part of their, schedules and so on. But if we treat it like any other day, what makes us different? God, I'll avoid saying all the things that God required the people to do in order to understand this. God wants to attract all of his children back to himself by our witness to these commandments, and then this will fall into place. But we keep doing this. And God keeps saying, you've got to have it this way. And we keep doing this. We make our children more important than God. They aren't. We make our spouses more important than God. They aren't. We make our jobs more important than God. They aren't. They can't be. No child could live up to God. No spouse could live up to God. They can't do it. It's unfair. We must do this, and then we'll do this better. You see? Like I know perhaps anybody who might be listening to me knows this intellectually. It's not the point. Maybe you don't. So you'll wrestle with what I've just said. But if we know it intellectually, there's more that has to happen. It has to travel down to our heart and actually lead to a conversion of action and the way we actually live it out. It's like Josemaria Escriva said, love is not in sweet words, but it's in deeds. Or it's not just sweet words. The words are important, but it's deeds, 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 right? What you've done to the least of my brethren, you've done it unto me. So this is really super, super important. I can only hope that it really speaks to your heart like it does mine. The psalmist reminds us how important this order is. The law of the Lord is perfect, reviving the soul. It's not a matter of the law of the Lord is perfect, it takes away all of our freedom. No, it revives the soul. The decrees of the Lord are sure, making wise the simple. It gives wisdom. Just imagine if we all made a serious, consistent, faithful effort to live for reasons of love and not as slaves, the Ten Commandments. Just imagine how better we would be, and then how better the world would be. Because every one of us in our own places throughout the world would be like a little bushfire. We would set people on fire by the way we behaved. And people would say, I want some of that. I want what you have. That's evangelization in action. The gospel recounts that Jesus cleared the temple of its buyers. These individuals were occupying the court of the Gentiles, this special area within the holy place where non-Jews were supposed to be allowed to pray and encounter the God of Israel. Jesus told them, and he was angry because they were committing sacrilege. They were defiling the holy place. He basically said, stop committing sacrilege and start committing yourselves wholeheartedly to the true worship of God. And the religious leaders should have known better. Is this not the reality of the Aqēḍah? Right? God first. God must be first, always. These are the last words in the mouth of Thomas More before they chopped his head off because he would not surrender to the king, who was arrogant, who was morally corrupt. And the only person he could really trust was the man whose head he was going to cut off, because Thomas More would tell him the truth, even with charity. I am the king's good servant, but God's first, even if it costs me my life. I cannot put the king ahead of God, you see. The king wanted Thomas More to do this, and Thomas said, I can't do that and live as a human being. I can't live with happiness in my life. I must do this. You see, tyrants and despots, they want us to do this, to make them more important than God. This is what we must continually revisit. This is the reality of the Aqēḍah. Abraham, I know you love your son. I gave you your son. You wouldn't have him without me. I know you love him. Give him back to me. Show me you adore me and you love your son, not adore your son and love me. Abraham, flying colors. Don't think this was easy. It wasn't easy. Abraham didn't know the outcome, but he trusted that even if he was required to do this, God would give him back his son from the dead. And that's why Abraham is such a powerful, that's why he's our father in faith. He's the father of Islam, of the Jews. Islam highly regards Abraham. And of course, the Christians. As I've already mentioned, since original sin and the commission of our own personal sins, the human heart has become something akin to an idol-making factory. It could be anything our heart searches for and latches onto many things, potentially anything or anyone. We avoid giving our whole heart to God because we're frightened. We're scared that if we give him our whole heart, he won't give it back to us. We'll be less happy. And in the process of thinking we're going to be happy by keeping it to ourselves, if you find your life, if you give away yourself, you will be happy. If you keep yourself, you'll lose yourself, says Jesus. We find misery because there is always misery without God. No one of us can go through a month without committing some, perhaps many, venial sins. It's not possible. All the masters in the spiritual life teach us this. If we know ourselves, we know this. When was the last time, for example, you went to confession? I asked this a couple of weeks ago, and I'll keep asking it. Not because I want to be an irritant in people's sides, but because it's an honest question that is fitting in line with the Aqēḍah. If we really want to be not just free of sin, but grow in the spiritual life. Many Catholics still think that I should really only go to confession, if I have a mortal sin. No, the church has never taught that. The sacrament of penance is a supernatural and practical way to live the Aqēḍah, to ensure that nothing takes over our heart, my heart, our way of living, our dealings with God and the people around us. You don't have to commit a mortal sin to be in trouble with your spouse or your friends or your children or your parents. Snarkiness, laziness, attitude, all those things. Swearing in traffic and the kids are in the car. It goes on and on. We all have our own little, bag of stuff that we can do, right? People need to return to the sacrament of confession and then the Eucharist, even if there's no mortal sin. Obviously confession, even if there's no mortal sin. Because our hearts can become dull. Our motivation can be sucked right out of us to go to Mass. I was talking to somebody in another province, faithful Mass goer, and he said he had to really sort of make that extra act of the will to get, to go to Mass, to get to church, because he was becoming too comfortable watching it on TV. Now, in this province, they can go to Mass, a certain percentage. Here we can't yet. But what's to stop people from coming to receive Holy Communion when they can for 2 hours on a Sunday? Last week, we reached over 300. God, I still had time to sit down, so give me no time to sit down, as if I'm looking forward to that. But the important thing is people wanting to receive our Lord in the Holy Eucharist, Father Conlon as well. The church is safe and is as healthy as your local grocery store, if not safer and healthier. And you need the food of everlasting life more than you need food in your body. And we need food in our body, I'm not discounting that. And we need the grace of the sacrament of penance. It's the only way we can grow in the spiritual life. These two critically important sacraments. It's not about everybody being a rotten person. It's about wanting to grow in the spiritual life, and we all know about those little things. Do we just let them build up and cling to us like barnacles on the bottom of a boat? Or like Jack Nicklaus, who worked so hard to ensure that he wasn't getting incorrect swings, just a little bit. He wanted to make sure he was always subjecting that to analysis, examination, and correction so that he could be better at his game. When we live the whole truth of the Aqēḍah, we not only avoid many defects we tend to succumb to, many venial sins we fall prey to, but we find strength God's strength to avoid mortal sins and their occasions, and then deepen in our love for God. So we may still be attracted to go to the computer and surf and then find things we shouldn't find. Well, we have to kind of cooperate with grace and smarten up. None of this stuff comes free. It requires sacrifice, love. And it's not just words, it's deeds. Die to ourselves. Our supernatural loves change and we experience a happiness we never knew existed. But it takes trust, just like it did with Abraham. Today, ask Abraham and St. Joseph to help you live in your life the reality of the Aqēḍah, to give your whole heart to God. Trust him that he won't take away what you care about in life, as long as it's essentially good and it will lead you to heaven. Otherwise, you just say like any saint with half a brain, get it out of my life if it will lead me to hell. But if it will lead me to heaven, purified, Lord, that's what I want you to do, because I love you. I don't want to be separated from you. I love you, and I trust that you'll give it back to me purified. Hear, O Israel, the Lord is one, the only one who can give us what we really and deeply long for as human beings, and that is to be truly happy and loved. Remember, keep it this way. Don't allow this to happen.